Hey everyone, welcome back to Agile After Dark. We have a fun episode tonight. Talk about data, we talk about chickens, we talk about delivering, we talk about Greg and the good old days. We have a lot of fun, so hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Agile After Dark, the podcast that addresses Agile topics not talked about in the light of day. I'm your host, Greg Adams-Woodford, sitting here, and with me today, sitting over there, is my co-host, Brandon Gartley, and our resident nerd.
I know I say this on almost every podcast, but I'm really excited about this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why would you say that?
Well, number one, we have a fantastic guest that had worked with Greg for many years, so we'll hopefully get a lot of stories. Two, we're trying a new version of the remote interview, which I'm hopefully is going to be a little bit better quality. And three, it's a beautiful day in the Heartland today.
It was a beautiful day in the Heartland. And of course, we're here in Apollo 13 studio. And the one thing I'm nervous about, to be honest with you, for the first time in our podcast history, which we're up to how many episodes have we done? Is this 12, 10, 12?
I think we're up to like a baker's dozen or so.
Yeah, so we're good. So we're good there. But the one thing that makes me nervous is that we are bringing on Kaili Barone, who I did work with at a number of companies in the past. She's got product management expertise, amongst other things. And one of my favorite people, we had a article written about how her journey started in pragmatic marketing, and we'll post that in the show notes, as long as the podcast, which accompanies that as well. But I'm happy to reconnect with her, although we do talk about once a week, even though we've been working with each other for about 5 years. So I want to let Kaili talk about her background a little bit and what she's interested in, including the episode, which today is called Hatching Those Chickens, Stop Counting and Start Delivering.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So, as Greg said, we've worked together for a while. Originally started supply chain, so working kind of the operations, logistics, inventory, that kind of aspect, and kind of fell into product management thanks to Greg, which I love dearly, both Greg and product management. So, you get to solve great problems often and be that voice of the market and that empathetic perspective and break things down to just a human level and ideas are cheap and talk is cheap. And how do we actually get the insights and say, no, this is what they need. This is their problem. This is the pain point. The behavior is supported by the data this way, and get all your ducks in a row to figure out how are we going to, just stop talking about it already and start delivering customer value.
So you're not really a touchy-feely type, is what I'm getting from that.
I guess not.
You're not really sort of, how does the customer feel? I don't know. It sounds like you're more driven from a data perspective. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. I guess to give me some sort of credibility, I've been in the education technology space for a long time, so it is a great space to be in because who doesn't want to help kids learn and help future generations? So you kind of got to have some sort of heart and emotions.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, Greg and I both kind of have talked about our backgrounds in pedagogy and stuff, and he even got a little choked up the other night. I'm not kidding, actually.
He did get how many classes?
Well, there was a little bit of that, but yeah, he was like, and then these kids, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Are you choking? What's going on over there?"
I'm doing it now. Stop.
But yeah, that's super cool that you've kind of been in that space for that long, and that you can bring all those insights into something that makes such a difference for people is really, really cool. So looking forward to kind of talking a little bit more about that today, which gets me into kind of what we want to cover today and the main questions that we're kind of trying to answer. So first, there's a lot of investment being made on how to deliver things. They're investing to try and hatch those chickens, but where are the results? Are we really seeing those? And then kind of how can we use some of the things that you talked about, Kaili, some of that real-time data to help, these companies make decisions. And then finally, if we have all that information and we understand that we're trying to deliver and we're trying to hatch those chickens, how do we change the mindset of kind of that sequential decision making to be something more real time and kind of create that culture?
Yeah, and it's something that the term Brandon likes to use called management debt. It's sort of like shifting from the old way of thinking, which is, well, we're gonna design and then we're analyze and we're gonna build and then we're gonna deliver and it's gonna take 3 years. Which Kylie, you and I know how that works, right? We're based on our work in that first company that we worked at, education company we worked in. But I think this management debt concept is really important because it's taking the management space and saying there's a different way to do things and it's more incremental versus we're going to plan out our, from our budgeting to our product development to everything. We're going to do that in one gigantic 3-year period. And how many strat plans did you and I work on at that company? Right. I mean, at least 7 or 8, which never ended.
Yeah.
It was like, we didn't finish one before we started the next one. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so how can you deliver value sooner so that it's not that you just have spun up a database and spun up a CI/CD and there's no customer value delivered before your project's funding gets cut?
Right, exactly, and that kind of gets me to I'm gonna do my little nerd here thing here. I know I've heard through the grapevine.
Nerd
Kylie,
alert!
I have a kindred soul, spirit in you, but a lot of investments being made to kind of get that software out more quickly. That CI/CD, DevOps, it's kind of the main thing. And in a recent study, there's predictions about the DevOps market size is around 12.85 billion by 2025 and a growth rate of 19% by 2020. I mean, that's significant money that these companies are investing to
But what do they
supposedly get it out.
So here's where I come in. So what's the point? Why would a big company invest that kind of money and then have no apparatus to deliver what is the outcome of what's supposed to be happening is you're supposed to be delivering, getting feedback from your customers, bringing that back into the cycle from a product management perspective, and then making changes fast. What they do is it just goes into a big black hole, and they don't ever see the end because it's too far removed from a time perspective.
Right, and I'm gonna kind of take a different angle on that, but kind of continue on what you talked about in terms of that management debt. I mean, it's very easy to be the curmudgeon. Oh, that's a new title
Wait
for
a
you.
second.
We got another one. We got a commie.
I'm a communist.
A finance guy.
Finance guy.
EVP of being a dick.
Yeah.
And I think now a curmudgeon.
Okay, good. Okay, so now there's 4.
All right, so there's four good ones, and they're kind of all related.
I put it on my LinkedIn page.
Yep. But to kind of take it in terms of thinking about from that management debt side, because that's kind of what I'm, I think we've all seen it, right? In terms of, okay, I've heard agile is the thing to do. Like, that's going to get me stuff faster. Okay, we're going to be agile. Okay, well, you can be as agile as you want to be, but if you don't have the tools and the technology and the thought process in terms of getting stuff out, you're going to run up against a wall. So, okay, let's do DevOps. Okay, now we do that. Then, okay, now we have the stuff. Maybe we have the stuff out there, but then what? Okay, right, Kylie? I mean, that's kind of where I think we're at right now.
Well, even if you can get through let's just even include the term pipelines. Like, even if you can get through in a big enterprise organization, getting through all those pipelines, getting all those green lights, even then, are they equipped to actually take back in the feedback from the customer?
And that's what I want to ask Kylie, is because she's kind of been on that journey, I'm sure, where, you've gotten to this point where like, okay, we're willing to spend this money now to get stuff out. Well, then what?
Yeah, so that's a good point. And that's where I come in with the product voice, is kind of representing that outcomes over output perspective. Automated testing, CI/CD, all those things are great for that incremental and, doing those quick releases and getting stuff out there. But are we just building stuff and deploying stuff to just stay busy? What's the kind of goal and what are we driving? And how are we measuring against that? How do we know what the success criteria is? How do we know how we're doing? So thinking first, okay, what are we trying to impact? So what's the outcome we're hoping for? So ed tech, basically a lot of that driving forces around student academic performance. So knowing what we're trying to hit and then putting in the pieces to get there and measuring them along the way. So for instance, in a gamified test prep product I did, we were, test prep's not fun. It's boring. It's awful. It traditionally been primarily in workbooks where you're just taking print-based practice problems over again and again.
Oh, I
Like
hated
what kids
those.
like, yeah, sign me up for that workbook. Can't
Yeah.
wait to do practice test problems. So that's where we took the gamification angle as our unique value proposition to differentiate ourselves. But it was a risk and it was a bet, and schools are mostly conservative. So gamified aspects weren't naturally a thing they were jumping off, coming to sign up for and like, yes, we can't wait to bring that to our schools. The kids, on the other hand, couldn't wait. So we targeted more or less the users of the software, got their feedback, got things in their ideas based on them on how to put in those extrinsic motivators that were interesting, that they knew from the games that they chose to play on their discretionary time, that they would then potentially choose to give up playing this game to go and play this academic game. And we measured them. So we were trying to see which were impacting our desired, student academic performance goals. And we could see in the data over time, in a short period of time, actually looking in our analytics tools, just, Google Analytics and the ones we were using, that the ones that made no impact, that were basically just like flatline, they might as well not have been there because nobody was utilizing them, and they weren't driving the outcome we wanted. But we clearly see that with, like, for instance, the elements of rewards and earning coins and earning badges and being able to customize things based on the things that they earned, that was a driving force that was highly correlated to our desired outcomes.
So that's awesome, and as I said, those workbooks, man, those bring back some nightmares for me. But but I mean, I'm kind of curious in terms of when you saw that issue, was it like, okay, we have a project, we're gonna like figure out we have a market that we think we can get to. Was it kind of what the traditional one, which is, okay, we're gonna look at this and we're gonna create the game, and then we're gonna get it out, and then we're going to get the data, or was there getting data beforehand? Like, I'm curious in terms of kind of how that all wove together in Griggs.
Well, and the other thing, Kylie, was if you remember, we had a very tight budget on that project specifically. And
Yep.
one of the reasons that we were measuring things is because we wanted to abandon things that weren't working sooner rather than later, so we weren't wasting money, right? Now,
Yep.
this is where the finance guy, which I'm charged in, which makes you laugh because you know me, which is I'm not a finance guy, but that was part of the reason that we were doing that, was to ensure that we were investing in the right things that had traction, right? I mean, that was a big part of what we were doing. It's obviously about customer satisfaction, but it's also about making good decisions on the build, because it costs a lot of money to build software.
Yeah, that an example was sales was asking for audio, saying that we needed audio support in all of this. And as you can imagine, audio is expensive, and just
Oh my
even
God,
the
I remember
limited
this.
computer voice that we were trying to embed as an experiment. This was before we even had experimentation platforms and so forth. So we were kind of running our own little ad hoc experiment and just tracking that. And you could see that nobody was using the audio. Nobody was ever clicking that, utilizing it at all.
And by the way,
None of the users cared
this
about it.
was a war, Kylie. Remember this? This was a war
Mhm.
because senior management, talk about management debt.
Okay, yep.
Senior management was convinced that this was a competitive not differentiator, because it was a competitive thing that we had to do so that we could just maintain, because the other product had it. And we were really up against one other product. And we fought it and said, no, it's a huge amount of money. It's a huge amount of time. Nobody uses this. And so we were able to use real data to help us make good decisions to senior management to say, no, you guys are wrong on this one. And they ended up kind of conceding to that.
Yeah, we deprecated that feature. Yeah, we took it out and saved $100,000 immediately, and it would have just kept growing as we built the product.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about kind of that management was fighting it, and kind of they're basing it off kind of, the competitor has it, so we need to be as good as competitor, if not better, right? And that's kind of one of those driving factors that kind of exists, and so we can, okay, it's but I Kylie worked in kind of PR and advertising for a decent amount of time, and it was like when social media blew up and companies were saying, well, I want to be on Facebook. Okay, all right, well, what's your tone? What are you thinking? And they're like, no, Facebook is a thing. I need to be on there, and we need to make money off of it, right? And no one was making money off Facebook at that point, by the way. So it's it's the same sort of kind of knee reactions where they're just kind of, this is why I'm making this decision, because either someone told me about it and I think it's a good idea, and now we're seeing it in, okay, let's be agile, right? Let's do DevOps. And they don't even really understand what DevOps is. And Greg and I didn't either until someone came on a podcast and told us what it was. But yeah, those sort of things, and so that I'm kind of, and I kind of want to like transition from this section into the next one after the break, which is, it seems as though there's better understanding and awareness of data analytics, right? The companies are looking to invest more in that, and they're kind of, trying to get a feel for it. But, kind of building on what we've been talking about, what are some of the problems that are kind of existing in the world that, Greg and I work in and you work in, Kylie, and how can those tools and the things that you're doing kind of help us there? So I'm going to take us to a break. Greg, is that good with you?
That's good with me.
Kylie, is it good with you?
Yep.
All right, cool. So everyone, please feel free to give feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com. If you want to, Greg hasn't been ranting. I think he's a little afraid of Kylie. So, but if you want to request some rants, just email GAW, feedback @agileafterdark.com, and see previous episodes at agileafterdark.com as well. And we'll see you on the other side. What is your favorite Greg story that's, of him doing something really silly?
There's so many. The good one that I like is Greg has a life-size cutout of him out of foam board, and
Which is still in
it's a
my garage.
caricature. Yeah, so it's accentuated, and it's pretty funny. He's got this giant head and everything. So when we started together at a new company, well, he was there before me, and I joined, and I was like, oh yeah, foam board Greg is coming out. So I waited a little bit, a couple weeks in, and then just brought him. We had a right when you walk through the doors, full floor to ceiling glass from right there.
All right, we're back here with Kaili Barone, product management extraordinaire, somebody I've worked with a long time. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're drinking tonight. So, Brandon, are you doing something different?
I am doing something a little different.
You got a Chicago thing going on
there.
It
is. It's a Heartland beer, Goose Island, which I think is pretty widely distributed now, but it's their 312.
Yeah.
Chicago area code,
Yeah.
Urban White Wheat Ale. It's,
I've changed things up
favorites.
quite a bit. I'm not changing anything up. I'm doing Maker's Mark, so I'm just going to keep with the same thing. What are you laughing about, Kylie?
Everybody knows you.
Oh, everybody knows. Okay, everybody knows. That doesn't make me. I mean, we need to rethink some things. How about you, Kylie? What do you outside of the Cabbage Patch? What do you call it? The Sour Patch Kids?
Yep. Just hopped up on Sour Patch Kids.
Okay. I think we're more healthy drinking what we're drinking than eating what you're eating, by the way.
Wait, Kylie starts talking really fast from all the sugar.
And by the way, she also is at work still, so because she's on Pacific time, so she made an effort to make sure she was with us, so we appreciate that. So I think, Brandon, what we want to get into next is what are some of the methods to get this analytics? How are they used? Kylie will probably talk optimistically about them, and I might come in with something like curmudgeon-ish. Now that you've branded me as every week, I get one more of these brand names associated with me. But so Kylie, if you want to kind of talk about some of the things that especially what we did in the past, things that worked. And some of the new things that you're seeing that you really plugged into from the product management side of things, that would be, I think, a good ideal. And then we'll kind of banter in with our questions for you.
Yeah, sure. On the quantitative side, so it's just getting any data you can from any of the results. Like with academic data, we can kind of see that and see how things are performing that way, but also from the behavior side. So using the analytics tools to see what features, tagging, make sure we can kind of tag our different features, our different pages, our different events, and see what's happening in the real world and what's working and what's not. And then also kind of using the experiment mindset. So when we're thinking of solving a new problem, how can we try it and try it in a small aspect and kind of either test two different theories and see how they perform, or even do things before we put anything into code and just do wireframes or lo-fi mock-ups and get those out and get some qualitative feedback, or do some usability studies to see if they can go and complete the tasks that we're asking them to do. Can you add a student to your class? Does that happen successfully? Are they able to click through that prototype and make it happen? If it works, great, let's turn that into code. If it doesn't, good, we also didn't invest a lot and have to refactor. It's just fix it first
So,
in the design.
So one thing, Kylie, that is interesting to me, and by the way, Sass has made her entrance into Apollo 13.
I don't know if you heard
She
that.
tore down the
If you could put
hatch.
together a program to teach a cat not to tear down Apollo 13.
Sass is our podcast cat, and she always breaks into it. No matter how we try to make it not happen, she tears down the hatch every time, and now it's on
Can't
top
you
of me.
distract her?
No,
Give her some catnip or something?
She's
Oh
got
God, no, dude.
Yeah, we
That
don't
would
want
be
to
a
do
very
that.
bad
That
idea.
would be not good.
She's called sassafras for a
Yeah,
reason.
it's a little, but what I wanted to ask you about is, even though we've got all this great data coming to us and we are, trying to understand what the customers are thinking, it still always ends up being the customer, the client, the end user always is just mad about the thing that made them angry the last week, or something that failed last week. And so there's a science around, even if you have the data, right? There is a science around the other side of it. So when we did those great buy a feature,
Yep.
exercises,
My favorite.
where we got customers to come in and actually understand what prioritization means and make decisions, how do you deal with that, even though you're collecting all this data and it feels very like sterile and scientific to me? At the end of the day, you're still trying to convince a user to do a certain thing or to accept a certain kind of behavior driven by software. So I'm kind of interested in what your perspective on that is, because it's not just about gathering the data, it's about convincing people that, because at the end of the day, you can get all the data, you can change the features, and you still have to convince somebody, from a salesperson or a client or an end user, that it's better in their interest, right?
Yep, and that's the soft side of product management. So understanding kind of how to represent those customer values and to weed through that. Those prioritization exercises really help, because even though, yes, they were just complaining to your customer success team yesterday and they were, they want it fixed immediately. When you put everything in perspective, they're like, actually, no, that can really wait. We really need this larger thing because that impacts our business for X, Y, and Z. And just hearing those conversations helps you figure out what their priorities are and understanding what trade-offs they're making. So those exercises are very valuable, and you can't just, it's not just a science. Product management is not a science. We can't be, just replaced with bots and AI and all that kind of stuff. That in the product community, everyone kind of is coining the term product management, or product as a craft. So it's marrying the art side of it with the science side of it. So it's just one factor.
Well, I'm sure Brandon's going to want to jump in with some nerd science stuff here based on what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something that I thought really interesting when I was kind of thinking about, our conversation today or this evening, is that because I had come from doing a lot of digital work, and it was, when UX was really taking off, and there was this whole concept of like developing personas. And I think Greg told me you guys used to have like this whole room where like you could view the people doing stuff and so on. But they're starting now. It's kind of interesting to kind of use the agile research method to like create behavioral personas. So to your point, where they're using that data regularly instead of like, because like in the old school way of UX, you create this persona and you're like, okay, this is our consumer. And then you kind of always did directions to that particular persona or another persona. But the fact that they're now seeing the value in terms of, all right, the personas, they can change too, right? And when I saw that, I thought of you, and I was curious to, see if you've seen anything like that, or kind of how that direction is going in terms of it's not even just the product, but they're using it for influencing how you mold the product.
Yeah, and it's funny, Kylie. I was just watching some show where they were showing some startup that was like a pizza delivery company where they bake the pizzas on their way. They're in Silicon Valley, obviously, on the way in a truck, and they had these personas around the room just like we used to. And if you remember, Lisa, we had a product that was geared towards alternative high school students.
Oh, I love this story.
And we had, what was the name of the guy in Breakfast Club that was the Judd Nelson character or whatever his name was?
Yeah, but you know what you're talking about.
Basically, she wrote her persona around this is the kind of student that we're trying to target. Not that all those kids, by the way, were that kid.
Oh, this is where you got choked up last week.
Yeah,
I was talking about this.
But that's one of the things. So, I think I think they work, but I do think it gets overused a little. Here's again, curmudgeon Greg coming in. I do think it does. I think it was useful at some point in time, but I think it pigeonholed. I think that everything has been so diversified. When I look at my kids, even everything is so diversified now. I think those user personas are helpful, but I think they pigeonhole the client a little bit. And I'd like to get your because Kylie and I don't always agree, if you can imagine, on these things. But I would just like to get your opinion on that, Kylie.
Yeah, I'm a little squishy on personas. I kind of have a love-hate relationship. So here, of course, our personas are our students and teachers, and oftentimes, we've all gone to school, so we've all been students. So it's kind of a catch-22 because uh, everyone kind of relates back, well, when I was in school, this happened, or my parents or my teacher, this or that. And it's like, well, this is a different world. You are not in school today. You are
Right.
no longer a sixth grader in the year 2018, and these are not your problems and so forth. So having those personas does help put it in perspective to say, like, I'm a student, I have to help with the family business. I also have these other commitments and I have a side job and I'm also working as a YouTube influencer. So those weren't that you can't necessarily relate to that because that maybe wasn't your thing 20 years ago. So it helps from that perspective to understand all of the different kind of demands on their time when we're asking them to sit in front of the computer and do algebra when YouTube is right next to it. And how much more fun is that than algebra? So it helps frame things, but it doesn't provide all of the answers because you can't just ask the persona questions and you're kind of answering for the persona. And so you're still using your own jaded perspective and influence.
Yeah, and I know it's really very much different for Greg, who is a black and white TV influencer.
How dare you? Yes, I
Watching the
do use
Westerns.
cards before stickies.
Yeah. I think only Westerns were shown in Colorado, right?
we
John
rode
Wayne.
horses to work to school.
Through the desert.
But I think it's true. I think that again, it's a when we go back to remember the sessions we did, Kylie, with Lightning Labs, with the folks who came over from, I think it was Yahoo, if I'm not mistaken, and
Yep.
we spent how many people's time for 4 days? How many people were in that? That was
way too many, probably over 20.
over 20 people for 4 days. And while I think it was a great exercise from kind of a culture perspective to get people engaged, I don't know if the end result was as effective as having this kind of one-on-one experience with an end user or a client. I think that was, again, you get to be in a situation where you're dreaming, sitting in your office about, oh, this is what they want. This is the right thing to do because we're smart, because that's how we were hired. And that's not the case.
Yeah, and it's again, I guess I can't take a stance. I have a love-hate too, again, with doing the usability pieces. So we did rapid prototyping and bringing users in to validate those,
Mm-hmm.
and then we would iterate and get it back out at the end of the day with part of that lightning lab and that design sprint kind of concept. But my problem I love usability and I love hearing what the users have to say, but they are inherently nice when they're in those sessions. They're telling you what they want you to
Yeah.
hear. They're trying to please you because they know behind the glass, behind the one-way mirror, are people watching who built this and they're watching us.
Well, and
So
that's
they don't want to get it wrong, you
yeah, and
know?
that's interesting in terms of now with the tools that are out there in terms of capturing the data. Those people aren't really aware of all of the data that you're capturing, right? And
Yep.
there's things now. When we talked about DevOps and the previous things, there's things like canary testing and all these different things where you can really segment the type of people that you want to release certain things to and kind of get feedback on that. And in a way, it's kind of jumping past that. Oh, they're just acting this way because they think they need to, right?
Yeah, because how do you marry what they say and what they actually do?
Mm-hmm.
Because usually it tells a different story. They'll say one thing that they're going to use it, like the audio, and then you actually go and track it, and no, they don't use it.
Right. Yeah, and I'm in terms of, I think Greg mentioned that you had gone to some, what was it, a conference or something? What was it that you were mentioning?
The product camp.
Yeah, the product camp. What was the story behind that? Because you were talking about it during the break, and I was picking
Well,
up on it.
so Kyle and I were always searching, and this is long after we had even been working with each other. But we went to LA, and LA is interesting because usually you think about Silicon Valley as the center for all of this stuff, but LA has a really interesting burgeoning tech community, and so they sponsored this thing called Product Camp. And who was the Kylie was enamored with the guest speaker that they had. Kylie, who was that? If you remember off the top of your head.
No, didn't happen.
No.
We were at the Hulu offices, which was cool.
Yeah.
We're enamored with their offices.
But you were. What about the Silver Fox? Don't forget about him.
Move on. This is not relevant.
So anyway, what that was it's a product management conference, and there were a bunch of speakers, and it was, I think for us, it was more of a validation of the things that we had been doing, even though we, at the time, and we talked about this a little bit with Regender a couple weeks ago, where we really didn't think we were very good at what we were doing. And when Kylie and I were there, not that we didn't get good information from it, and we volunteered and helped out and everything, got a great coffee mug. That was what we got, a coffee mug at the end of the day. Yeah, we got a coffee mug.
You're like a kid that goes like the Grand Canyon.
Well,
we
got there early.
souvenir.
We had to put all these boxes together and all this stuff. And Kylie's like, "No, this is gonna be worth it, dude. We're volunteering. We're getting it for free. Blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Okay." And then we got a coffee mug at the end of it. So,
do you remember that in and of itself was an exercise? Just watching a dozen product managers try to do a task.
By the way,
everyone had to put in their opinion.
Okay, by the way, this is a good point because, and I know this is a little off track, but we did watch. So it was like, how do you self-organize? Okay, one of the principles of Agile, right? And so all these people are there from an Agile perspective, supposedly. So we had to just literally put crap in bags. And watching product managers trying to work together, because they're all inherently selfish and want to do their own vision about their own thing, was hilarious. So Kylie and I were just sitting back and we're like, they can't organize anything. They don't know what they're doing. And finally they figured it out, but it was clear that product managers, not good as a team. They're inherently just about their thing.
You ever seen Agile coaches actually try to be a team in sprints?
Yes.
It's like a disaster.
Yeah. So interesting that we see these things that we hold dear to us that we don't practice because, again, human nature gets in the way, right?
That he's being very calm because you're on the call, Kylie. But that was a version of a Greg's rant. He's just not all riled up.
Yeah, I could get riled up, but that was. I'm happy you brought that up because I forgot about that. Remember we sequestered ourselves in that little room in the back there so we could listen to what we wanted to and not listen to all the jargon and all the stuff that goes on and with all these things that relates to that. This is, by the way, called Agile After Dark. If you have been listening, and we're trying to bring out topics, and some of these things are just people go to these conferences and they just talk to themselves and they repeat the same things to themselves. And they're not really self-critical, frankly, in a lot of times.
And those are always the refreshing ones. And someone is just like, yeah, I screwed up.
Well,
people are like, whoa.
Right. And I think the topic of this is it's not only we are not healthy and being honest with ourselves, but sometimes our customers don't even know how to be healthy in talking about what they need, right? And that's, I think, what Kylie just described, and it's a hard thing to do. Again, it's a human stuff. It's like Kylie said, it's the soft side of the product management, is getting people to be honest and getting people to really understand what the problem is. And that's a hard thing to do because, again, you're so influenced by your daily job, especially if you're in the education industry like she is. There's so much pressure. You can't look past the next day. It's hard, right? And so I think we also need to be, as a curmudgeon as I'm being, it is a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to execute. And I think you need to be sensitive also to every industry that you're working with. It's financial services. They have a hard time because they have these gigantic infrastructures and all this technical and management debt.
Yeah,
and,
but it's
oh boy,
it's kind of an excuse, is what I'm going to say.
It is,
because if they're going to make this investment, they're making an investment in we're becoming agile. We're making the investment in doing DevOps. Industries are investing like 9.5 to 15.4 trillion of their value in analytics and data. Like, all right, you're making the investment, so start using it. Right.
So that's, I think, leading us into our last section here, Brandon, about changing the mindset of management and the sequencing and all of that. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so.
Did you see that transition I just did there, Brandon?
Good. Yeah. He's on the ball. He's on his A game for you, Kylie.
I know, you
That's
could
good.
tell. It's different. I'm like, she's the boss of me. Like I've told her since first day I met her. Shuffle. Remember you used to call me Shuffle?
Oh my God.
Like I'd come by your, you knew I was coming. I'm like, how do you know it's me? She's like, could you shuffle? Your feet shuffle when you come by my cube. I'm like, okay.
In your Brooks Brothers uniform.
Yeah. My uniform. Yep. She's right.
Oh
Can't
my
deny,
gosh.
can't deny.
So he's not changed one bit. That's good to know.
So you want to take a quick break here, Brandon?
Yeah.
And so if you have any feedback for us, send it to feedback@agileafterdark.com. We'll be back in just a minute. I'm not joking. I literally mispronounced my
What
name
did you
4
say?
times. I was like, Greg Adams.
He was
like-
he's like trying to
Adams-
speed through Adams
It's
Woodford. I was like, speed through the Greg part,
Yes.
not the Adams Woodford part.
Foot Frada. I
He's like,
couldn't get
Greg
it.
Adams Woodford.
It was literally 3 times. I had to do my name 3 times.
Why didn't you just abort and go with Ga or something like that? Just can't. It's too much.
Yes, exactly. All right, so we're back after refilling our drinks and chatting it up a little bit, catching up for Greg and Kylie, even though they talk every week. But I'm enjoying kind of sitting in on it. So we've kind of discussed there's a major investment in terms of companies saying, okay, this agile thing, this DevOps thing makes sense. It's supposed to get things out more quickly to our customers. We're able to react to the market faster. And the second section, this last section we just went through, it's really kind of getting into, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of, listening to the data that's coming back on the products that you're putting out there, making sure you're not investing in things that aren't making you money anymore. Like stop, spending your money on that. But that all being said, similar to the agile side, I think, with this, way of looking at data and saying that this is going to add the value in terms of making those decisions, how do we get rid of some of that management debt that we talked about and really change the mindset of kind of that sequential decision making and turning insights into outcomes? And I kind of doing some of the reading, I kind of this concept of creating a healthy data culture within a company.
Here's how I would start that conversation, Brandon. I would say
I already started it, Greg.
I know, but I'm going to start it again in a different way. So here's what I would say. Executives are enamored with data. They think that data is always going to solve all of their problems. If they can see a pie chart or a scorecard or a whatever you want to call it, they tend to think that's going to be the way that they're going to understand how the business is being run and that they can go to sleep at night and feel good. And that just isn't the case because it's far more complicated than that. And I think that what product management doesn't do a good job of in certain areas is help it go, because the conversation goes both ways. It's not just teams being agile. It's not just product owners being effective. It's not product managers prioritizing things effectively. It's also how do you communicate to executives? I've said this a million times. What executives want is predictability and consistency. And they want to know that what they're doing is obviously making, they're going to look at, the financials to see if they're doing well, especially if they're a publicly traded company. They're going to be very focused on that. But at the end of the day, a lot of this data will lie to them, and or they won't see the value in it in a way that it makes sense. So how do, I guess the question kind of to Kylie is, Kylie, do you remember when when they asked us to build a product for an existing market that was a $70 million market, that was the test prep product that you were talking about earlier, that had an entrenched competitor that was already there, who had a sales distribution model that was already mature and essentially set up for that sales model, that business model. And you and I had to go in and fight to say, this is not a good idea. We will never win this. And no matter what we did, because we didn't have any data, right? They were like, no, it's we did. Somebody told them, I don't know who it was. They read it in an article or something. This is a $70 million market. That product is a horrible product. There's no way that we can't beat them because we're, the biggest company in this space. We're going to build a product, and here's $2 million to go start building one. And we fought it because we knew that was a bad idea. We knew it was a very bad idea to do it because we knew we didn't have the sales distribution thing sorted out. Even if we could build a better product, we couldn't deliver it, from a sales perspective. So Kylie, remember that meeting that you and I had where we got yelled at and you rolled your eyes at the AVP and was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then we put it off, and then we had to go and do it anyway. They made us do it.
Yeah, that was super fun.
And we did it. We went and did it. And we built a great product, and we hijacked it to use it as a platform for other things. But, it goes back to what you're saying is how do you get over that hump of the executives being focused on one thing? And I don't know, Kylie, if you've had recent experiences in that same area where you're like, this is just not a good use of our time or money, because I don't know where you're getting your data from, but this ain't where we're going.
Yeah. So, good question. I'm trying to think of a good example. There's just certain things where, there's an incumbent. We don't have a clear strategy on what's our value proposition and what problems are we trying to solve. If it's just me too, you're never going to win. It's a loss leader. So but you have to change the hearts and minds, and trying to do that, and probably data kind of helps that, because that's what they're looking at is bottom line revenue or things like that. But how can you use your data to help even uncover things? So use it for good, not for bad. So don't use it against people or any of that kind of stuff. But how can we learn from it and, like Agile, kind of the succeed sooner instead of fail fast kind of thing.
Right.
Take those and lessons.
There's this new term that's the new buzzword in the Agile community called business agility.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. We love that one on the show.
It's a bunch of people who came from a technology background trying to say, well, we know what business agility is because it's essentially the business is to blame. This is a mischaracterization. I'm going to get a lot of rants back on me about this.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I normally do, but not on this one.
It's a bunch of technology people saying the business doesn't get it. Here's what they need to do, and they're forcing these kind of agile methods and perspectives on the business, which doesn't have the same point of view. And so that's where the business agility fails, because exactly what you just described, which is getting information, making decisions, changing those decisions, not feeling guilty or bad about making those decisions because you had the information you had at the time from a business perspective, and then pairing and working with the technology group to understand, here's why we're changing that. Here's one of the main, okay, here we go. I'm going on one right now, Brandon. Get it ready. Get ready right now.
Brace yourself, people.
Here's the deal. Every place I go, the biggest complaint is business and technology don't work together. And they typically try to build some bridge in the middle to say, oh, we're going to create some group in the middle. So they hire more people, which isn't going to solve the problem, which Kylie mentioned earlier, to bridge the gap, where the business should lead the direction and they should have a good working understanding with the technology team, meaning that they have empathy for what the technology team has to deal with, technical debt, whatever that means, all the CI, CD stuff, DevOps, all the stuff we've been talking about, if that doesn't exist. But the business doesn't understand what that really means. The technology group, especially if the business is weak, will just run off and do whatever they want. We saw this in a $75 million project that got delivered 5 years late at one of the companies that Kylie and I worked with. If those two things aren't meshing and you aren't using good data and the business doesn't understand what it takes to actually build something, again, this is kind of turning into a product management, kind of podcast, but that is the biggest complaint you hear. How do we marry business and technology? Everywhere I go, that is the biggest complaint. And if the leadership can't make a concerted effort and a commitment to solve that problem and to build that bridge, you're never going to get anywhere. And the stuff that Kylie's been talking about the whole time, which is using these data analytics, because guess what? The technology people love the analytics. They want to see, hey, they want to build those things in. So they have a sense of, why are we doing what we're doing every day? And the product we code stuff and it just goes into the ether. They love the fact that they're getting feedback, right, Kylie? I mean, didn't we see that on multiple products? They love the fact that they're a part of the business strategy too, right?
Yeah, because otherwise they're just part of this black box. There's a void. They don't know. They're not getting that back. So the more you kind of get them closer to the customer, the more they start having empathy, the more their ideas, like the collective group team's ideas, is just everything's richer and everything's just a better overall experience. So, and everybody's invested in that. And then we're building that healthy data culture. The team's interested, the engineers, the developers are looking at our analytics, looking at the heat maps, understanding the peak times, understanding with their CI/CD, and they're doing their weekly continuous deploys, this is the optimal time. They make the investment to get up at 3 a.m. to deploy at that point or whatever they have to do, so that it's not during peak hours. And that's all thanks to using data for good.
Right.
Ooh, data for good.
Data for good. Hashtag data for good.
Writing that down. Data for good. Data for good.
That's pound, Greg. Pound. Data for good.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, got it.
But I mean, I was sitting here. Greg was looking at me because I was, had my hand in my chin. And
He was pondering.
I was pondering something because you guys have kind of sparked something in my mind, which is kind of goes back to something Greg has said on past podcasts, which is, sometimes when we talk about these terms use us instead of us using them. And I'm kind of wondering, from a data perspective, particularly for leadership, because I think in the teams, you're spot on, Kylie. That's been the experience that I've had. They love to see the progress. They love to see that they're getting things out more quickly. They love to see, they're making a difference, and, it just adds to the positive energy. But I'm wondering, to kind of maybe achieve analytics at scale, maybe companies kind of work in the opposite direction. So maybe they should start identifying some of the decision-making processes that they can improve to generate additional value, and kind of in the company's business strategy, and then work backward to determine kind of what type of data insights are required to influence these decisions, and how the company can then apply them, right? So instead of being like, just give me a bunch of data, it's kind of saying, hey, what do I need to make the right decisions? And now let's go look at the data to help me make those decisions.
Yeah, what question are you trying to answer? And also don't go to the extreme of that you have to have data for everything and that you have to measure everything. And if something's not measurable, it doesn't count. Because, for instance, there's things like I mentioned, the extrinsic part. There's some fun side too. So there's things that just make you who you are, make you unique, or delight your users that maybe can't be measured, or your company culture, or things like that, the intangibles. And you need to have them so we don't all just become robots and just measured with our numbers and we're just NPS scores walking around.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, I could see like AI GA. That would be a fascinating
that's
experiment.
That's a oxymoron. And It's good for the fact that Kylie has warmed up to saying something like we don't want to just be robots. That's a lot of progress for her. You know,
It's all the Swedish fish or the Sour Patches, whatever they are, right?
Yeah,
I can't believe you eat those things. You're like the most healthy
don't
person I know.
discriminate.
Gee, every time
like
we go to
them.
lunch, she has to have kale in her. Or you probably moved on to Sprouts or something now. Like
I did have kale for lunch today. Not
See?
Sour Patch. Yeah.
I'm not joking. I'm not kidding around. Like every time we go, and then I get shamed, and I have to go to these. Like I have literally had to walk out of places where she's like, "We're gonna go to this place," and I go in there. I'm like, "They don't serve beer here. We're not going. Come on." She's like, "It's healthy." I'm like, "I'm not eating here." You know what I'm talking about, Kylie?
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of getting back to that data culture within a company, I think, Greg, you bringing the business agility thing in is an interesting part of that as well, right? In terms of, the agile folks, we've had a lot of frustrations, and a lot of the coaches we talk to is like, oh, what's the biggest problem? Oh, it's leadership. I think it's a little broad, and we try and dig into that a little bit more, right? But to understand, going away from, and that's why I like talking to you and Kylie, because the world that I came from a while ago was all projects, right? It's projects, projects, projects. Whereas I've learned a lot from Greg, Kylie. I know it's crazy, right? But I've learned a lot from him in terms of kind of thinking more of things in a product vision. And kind of, it's been interesting to hear some of the thought process on, even in large companies like the ones that Greg and I have worked on, since he kind of left the education thing and hasn't been helping people, he's just been helping the bottom line.
He just sold his soul.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just sell it
The thought process of in those sort of industries and companies and what they're dealing with from an agile and a DevOps and so forth, I really do see this as the next thing. This is going to be the next thing that they're going to be like, to your point, Greg, leadership likes data, but they kind of like the data where it's like, utilization reports. I want to know because the teams are the most expensive things. I want to know that they're working. And then I want to kind of see that they're delivering on their milestones.
And their butts on the line for it, and they made the commitment. So I wouldn't fault them for having that feeling. They just don't know how to manage it very well because of the management debt situation that we're talking about. They're used to the utilization stuff, but utilization doesn't mean your product's going to get delivered on time and with good quality. That has nothing. Utilization has nothing to do with that, right?
No.
I mean, that's about product management, and that's about ensuring that you know what your customer wants. And Apple does a great job with this.
Oh God, here we go, Kylie.
And no, but they do, and they because they have the business side, which they manage their inventory very well with Tim Cook. That's what he does, but they also anticipate and understand what clients need, and when they do make a mistake, they'll change things pretty quickly, given the size of that company, which is one of the biggest companies in America, if not the biggest company. So they do take that seriously, and they're a good example of how a big enterprise can be as agile as you can be that big, right?
Yeah, I would not be surprised. We talked about earlier at the very beginning of Netflix and Amazon and so forth in terms of their investment in DevOps.
Same.
But their investment in the data, and analytics and the canary testing with Netflix, I could be looking at my screen, Greg, and your Netflix thing will look very different.
Yeah. Do you have any experience, Kylie, on that canary testing? Where it's a toggle thing, right? Where you've got the toggle capability to toggle features on and off for a specific group who signs up for early adoption, and you can test out on that group. But in the real world scenario, not just in a test bank. Do you have any experience in that?
We've done some A/B testing, I guess. Maybe
That's basically what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the DevOps, it's getting just a little bit more sophisticated, where you can basically say, just do it to a percentage, or do it to people in this region, or and it's kind of built into the tools of the DevOps. And then they, of course, the DevOps thing, they're kind of more of it is, oh my God, is anything like
but it has
breaking?
To be, but it has to be run also by product management to know, okay, what group are you going to target? Mm-hmm. Because you can't just target anybody, because you don't really know what that means, right? And if you break something with that group, they're already mad about something. That's not a good group to target. So you need like the early, and then you have problems with early adopters, because the early adopters tend to be a little bit more open to issues and bugs and stuff like that. So you
Yeah.
have to have a good mix of how, and again, there's a science to doing that sort of testing, you know?
Yeah, and the A/B testing. I mean, what's kind of the interesting insights that you've kind of seen from that, Kylie?
Yeah, we're in a unique space because we're B2C and we're dealing with students and
Mm-hmm.
students' grades. And so no school administrator wants to hear that you're experimenting on kids. So that's where we kind of have to be a little tricky because we don't want anybody to fail their algebra class because of something that we were
Yeah, I remember
trying to
that.
test. So we can do more at the other levels, like with the teacher or administrator, because they're more forgiving and we can easier reach out to them without having parental consent and that kind of things. So I'd say we do more of it on those aspects versus with students directly.
And that's an exclamation point on what I was saying. You just can't like randomly just release things out and not understand the implications of that, both from a negative impact to the user group, but also are you getting back the best data because you're measuring. And we did a lot of research stuff when I was doing the research radio thing where you have longitudinal tests but there's a lot of science around that. I think we're going to have future podcasts on data science and how that all works. But it's complicated, as Kylie's pointing out. It's complicated, but you can still do a lot with what we have today, and especially with the technology of mining that data and in a positive way that doesn't also there's privacy issues, which we didn't even talk about, but we have all that to think about too. But I think go ahead, Kylie.
We do a lot with like designs and mock-ups instead of doing it in their real live class and impacting potential their real grades and their ability to graduate. So that's kind of our strategy around it.
Yeah. So I think to kind of wrap up this podcast, the stuff that I'm in this last section has like been really, really insightful, and I've like a million things going on in my brain right now. But I think for me, the interesting kind of how this all comes together is we've got the management debt and the leaders that are kind of just used to projects and getting things out on milestones. You've got the teams that are doing things more agile. They've got the DevOps that can get things out more quickly. They appreciate the metrics. They understand that, kind of how we're kind of pushing the line and getting things out and being able to then change those. We on a previous podcast, we talked about developers being kind of creatives, right? So they want to know, how can I solve these problems that, are coming back to us? But I think it really does get to your guys' sweet spot is at that product level, right? Because the leadership is going to say, I kind of want some data that's lets me know that everything's okay, and it probably should be different than the ones that we talked about. But at the product level, it's really more of using the things that Kylie talked about to form kind of an educational understanding of how things are changing, how we need to make updates, and so it's not so much of we're doing agile, we have a backlog, but we're still basically trying to hit milestones versus using that backlog to say it's going to change
to solve a problem,
right?
Solve a business problem.
Yeah, and that's part of that data culture where everyone kind of has an understanding, and that can feed into the vision.
Well, and that's one of the things that Kylie and I, our mantra, and everybody got sick of it, was what problem are you trying to solve? And I know it's kind of a little bit of a cliche these days.
Yes,
but it's exactly that. It's making sure that you're always focused on listening to the end user, the client, whatever that is, so that you're solving a business problem and not just going through the motions and doing a project like you brought up, Brandon. There's a big difference between product and project. Yep. And I think the world still is learning what that means in a large scale. But it's about doing the right thing and it's a hard thing to do because it's very mercurial.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about like startups and the difference and stuff like that, but everyone looks at them and is like, why aren't we doing what they're doing? Well, because they got products that they got to get out to those customers.
Yeah, and
otherwise,
they have like 4 customers, so yeah, they're going to be agile because they have to be agile. It doesn't. It's
they're going to listen to that data that's coming back, and they're going to,
and then they're going to grow big, and then they're going to have the same problems that all these other companies have. So don't look at startups as like the end all be all. They have to be agile, and they have to do this stuff because they have to get the next dollar. So don't put them on a pedestal. And Kylie and I might disagree with this, but as I've learned, it's like
she liked the Hulu offices.
They were pretty cool, by the way. They had beer. But it's like you can't give credit to something that is a necessity. Like it's hard for a large organization to transform into an agile organization than it is for a company that's just scrapping to get the next dollar. Like you can't. It's not fair.
Well, it's to build on that, and then we'll kind of like wrap this up. But to build on that, if we're dealing with the large companies that have been doing something for so long, in a way that's very different than what we've been talking about in this podcast, that's even harder.
Yeah, it's the debt, whatever the debt means. It's the technology debt, it's the management debt, it's all the debt that they have and all the baggage that they have and having to reorg and doing all the things they have to do to really move into this new world. It's a hard thing to do, and you have to be patient.
Well, you need people like Kylie to whip him into shape and say, hey.
Come on, Kylie.
Yeah, where are we headed? What are our outcomes? What are we going to measure? How are we going to track that?
Oh,
Don't just worry about velocity and outputs.
Yeah.
No, it's a good
like
point.
Kylie.
She always ends with this with me, by the way. This is always, she was like, well, what are you doing? What is your next thing? What are you going to do? Like, she always does this to me. So she's ended our podcast on a Kylie note.
Yes.
I think. And I will just say this. Thank you, Kylie, very much. I know you stayed late at work or interrupted your work to help us out with this conversation. I thought it was a good conversation, one that is kind of a little bit out of the norm, but I think it's good for us from the perspective of this particular podcast. I know I'll probably be having a kale salad with you at some point in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, of course. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah. It's been great, Kylie, and your reputation precedes you. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and so it's another podcast in the books. All
right. It's been a since. See, this is where I screw up.
Yeah.
It's been a thin slice of heaven. Thanks, Kelly.
All right. If you want to listen to other podcasts, go to agileafterdark.com or send feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com. Kylie's done a great job of articulating, there's all
this
these
shirt Brandon is
opportunities.
wearing is really disturbing. I don't ever want you to wear that shirt again. It's like he's literally wearing like a cat with sunglasses, and it's right on his boobs. Like the lenses of the sunglasses are on his boobs, and then there's like it's very disturbing.
Pecs,
Brandon.
Greg.
Very
Pecs.
disturbing.
It's called pecs.
Okay, pecs. Sorry, pecs. Your pecs. Your saggy pecs. I got more saggy pecs than you, so. Kylie's now disgusted.
Yeah, she's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm not in the heartland.
She won't say anything right now, but later on I'll hear about it. Trust me.